Welcome to episode 32 of Motivating Mondays, a weekly podcast and YouTube series dedicated to help Canadian job developers and other employer engagement professionals develop the tools, resources, expertise, and network to excel in achieving sustainable employment outcomes for their clients or students. My name is Christian St. Cyr, National Director of the Canadian Job Development Network, and today we're going to take a look at the feeling of discrimination many disabled job seekers are experiencing and the supports that we can provide to address this with both employers and job seekers. Job seekers with disabilities feel discriminated against, and job seekers with disabilities are discriminated against in securing employment as well as in advancing within organizations. Now that might seem like an obvious statement, but there's often a difference between what we feel and what is actually occurring in the labor market. It's possible a person feels that they are the best person for the job and an employer has hired someone else due to the first person's disability. It's also possible that the employer knows the other person is more qualified and has simply hired them for this reason. It's also possible that the employer thinks the other person is more qualified, but has been unconsciously influenced that the person with a disability could not necessarily function as well in the role due to their disability. And let's be honest, it's entirely possible the employer just hired someone without a disability because they don't want to hire someone with a disability. Job seekers and job developers, for that matter, are not fully aware of all of the factors an employer considers when they make a hiring decision, so we fill in the gaps. Prejudice against someone with a disability is an easy answer, but there's a lot more complexity to all of this. There is what the employer is consciously aware of and where they are motivated on an unconscious level. Sometimes they simply aren't hiring those with disabilities because they're uncomfortable with people with disabilities. And while we can give a lot of thought to the motivations and decisions of hiring managers and human resources professionals, they are only part of the equation. If job seekers with disabilities are presented with job loss or fail to secure a position, it's easy to see the disability as the major factor without understanding the hiring process. We would love to think that we live in a world that is black and white, where people are good or bad. An employer is prejudiced against a job candidate simply because they didn't hire them. The job seeker with a disability doesn't get the job. It must be because they have a disability. Let me be clear. As I said earlier, it's harder for those with disabilities to find employment than those without disabilities. While the employment rate for Canadians 15 to 25 youth was 54% in 2024, it was just 46.4% for youth with disabilities, and this had fallen actually from a percentage higher, 47.1% in 2023. It is getting harder year after year for people with disabilities to find employment. Discrimination is real, and it takes the form of employment outcomes that are lower than the skill and education level of the individual, lesser wages, and fewer opportunities for advancement. This is taking a real toll on job seekers. Keep in mind that Canadians with disabilities now represents more than a quarter of our entire population. During the 2022 Canada Disability Survey, 22.2% of respondents reported having a disability. Sorry, that was during the 2017 Canada Disability Survey. 22.2% of respondents reported having a disability. By 2022, this had increased to 27%. At the time of the national survey, more than one-third, 37% of persons with disabilities, indicated that they consider themselves to be disadvantaged in employment because of their disability, while 35% believed that their current employer or any potential employer would likely consider them to be disadvantaged. Encouragingly, this represents a decrease from 2017 when 41% said they considered themselves to be disadvantaged, and 42% said their current or future employer would be likely to consider them disadvantaged as a result of their disability. Between 2017 and 2022, the percentage of persons 25 to 64, which is core-aged workers, with disabilities believed that they had been refused an interview in the past 5 years because of their disability, but that did edge down 8 to 7%, and the percentage reporting a job refusal decreased slightly from 12% to 10%. Persons with more severe disabilities, men, 2S LGBTQ plus individuals, and racialized persons were likely to perceive some sort of workplace discriminatory practices than their respective counterparts more. More than one-third of persons 25 to 64 with disabilities, 37%, consider themselves to be disadvantaged in employment, while 35% reported that their current or potential employer would be likely to consider them to be disadvantaged because of employment and their condition. The 2S LGBTQ plus population with disabilities was more likely than their non-2S LGBTQ plus counterparts to report having experienced labor market discrimination, with higher proportions indicating that they had been refused an interview, 10% versus 6%, and a job, 16% versus 9%, or a promotion, 15% versus 9%. Now, I think this speaks to the idea that people who experience multiple challenges in obtaining employment have an exponentially harder time in securing employment. So, you might be wondering, why are perceptions of discriminations and why have they fallen in spite of a job market which clearly in the year 2025 is much more competitive than 3 years ago? I believe the answer lies in the fact that we've seen so much of the population who identifies as having a disability grow in this short period of time. In 2017, 22.2% of Canada's population had a disability or reported having a disability. By 2022, this was 27%. This represents an increase of more than 1/5 in just 5 years. I believe during the turbulent period of the pandemic, the stigma of having a disability eased slightly. People who would have once described themselves as having a physical or emotional or psychological challenge, but not necessarily a disability, were more prepared now to identify this as an actual disability. Also, our population is getting older, and sadly, for me at least, as you get older, the chances of having and developing a disability grows. We have a sudden influx of hundreds of thousands of individuals who identify as having a disability, but it's likely this larger population who have these disabilities will have minimal career impact, so the perception of prejudice isn't going to be as significant. This said, it still leaves us with the fact that there is both actual and perceived perceptions of discrimination, and what can we do about it? Older workers are often challenged with the presence of both real and perceived prejudice. When I'm advising mature job seekers, I coach them to not let these perceptions affect how they conduct themselves. I suggest that they maintain a positive attitude, demonstrate a willingness to learn new things, and if necessary, start at the bottom. There are employers who perceive that mature workers will have a sense of entitlement and inflexibility and a desire to stick to traditional ways of doing things. So I try to get people to defy these expectations. When coaching individuals with disabilities, I encourage clients to remember that not all employers are going to have a prejudice against those with disabilities, and some who do aren't even aware that they have this prejudice. I would provide training to job seekers in both direct and indirectly demonstrating that a disability is not going to limit their ability to do the job. If there are factors that will have an impact on the job, to directly speak to the approaches, the supports, and the technology that will minimize these impacts. We have a lot of ways we can demonstrate this. In resumes, we can detail all of the different tasks and responsibilities our client held within previous jobs. In cover letters, we can speak to specific workplace accomplishments they achieved and how they stood out in the workplace. In interviews or networking, our clients can share stories of how they haven't been held back in the workplace by their disability, maintained better attendance, and demonstrated greater commitment to their past employers. So what do we do about the employer who genuinely doesn't want to hire someone with a disability, and this is a conscious decision? Why waste your time? Why set your client up for disappointment? There are hundreds of employers in your community, and I doubt the threat of human rights violations or legal jeopardy are going to make much of a difference. It's not to say these aren't pathways for some individuals who've been wronged by past employers, and I would suggest you keep resources available to share with job seekers and those who've been let go due to a disability. For our part, we want to focus on employers who can look past these challenges. For employers who have an unconscious bias towards those with disabilities, we need to share information and experiences and specific candidates that will defy these perceptions. This is why I love breakfasts and lunches and awards that honor employers who see the value in hiring those with disabilities. It's a clear demonstration of the value of hiring those with disabilities to the broader employer community. In my experience, nothing helps employers see the value of hiring someone with a disability like hiring someone with a disability. I have seen it happen all the time and time again. And in many cases, these employers become your best ambassadors in the community. And while that might seem like a major hurdle, a larger hurdle might be changing the attitude of the person that you're working with. While many people with disability consider it a challenge to defy expectations and tackle every day with optimism and hard work, this is not everyone's story. Just as for those who don't have a disability, for many of us, our daily challenges break us down and leave us with doubt and disappointment. It's easy to see the disability as the burden every employer is not going to be able to look past. Now, I don't think there are any easy answers here. I'm going to suggest that every client is walking their own path. The best that we can do to support them is to meet them where they are, help focus on their own personal strengths and abilities, and to acknowledge that while there is genuine prejudice out there, this is not the case for all employers, and I'm even going to suggest this isn't the case for the majority of employers. Individuals with disabilities are no different in this case than anyone who encounters challenges in obtaining employment. We need to build them up, help them find their confidence, and encourage them to put their best foot forward, regardless of what might be going on in the mind of the person who is reviewing their application or resume. I firmly believe that confidence is one of the most important selling traits in job search, and it is an area where we in the career development sector can so positively influence our clients or students. This Friday, November 14th, is the deadline to get the 20% early registration discount for anyone who wants to attend this year's Labor Market Year in Review workshops, which are taking place respectively in British Columbia on November 28th and December 1st, and in Ontario on December 5th and 8th. Now, if you want to take advantage of this 20% discount, you need to register by this Friday, November 14th at 5 p.m. If you want more information for British Columbia, go to labormarketonline.com/LMI workshop. For Ontario, go to ontariolabormarketonline.org/LMI workshop. Thank you so much for joining us. Please click the like or subscribe button on your platform. Search for Motivating Mondays wherever you download podcasts. We'd also love it if you could subscribe to our YouTube channel and or rate or review this podcast. We do these sessions live and for free every Monday morning on Microsoft Teams with job developers from across Canada, and it'd be so great if you could join us. Just go to jobdevelopment.org to learn more. And if you have any questions, just send me an email. My email address is csaintcyr@labormarketsolutions.ca. Thank you so much and have an amazing week.